If there's one thing that is bad in life, it's an eagle that doesn't know it's an eagle. Now, there's a story that I want to relate here, and I've tried to pin it down, but there are multiple versions of it. But apparently, one farmer rescued this baby eagle that seemed to be abandoned on the side of the road, and that was highly unusual for an eagle to be in that situation. You'd call it an eaglet. But he rescued this little bird and took it home with him and decided to put it in the pen with the chickens. And this little bird grew up and thought it was a chicken. And it walked around and jiggled as chickens will, and it just started nibbling on little crumbs on the ground. Well, his farmer Fred came by one day. He looked at this hapless eagle that was oversized in with the chickens. He said, "Jeb, that just ain't right." "What are you talking about?" "You got that eagle thinking it's a chicken, and that's just not right." And that bothered him enough. He says, "I'll tell you something. Let me have this bird." And he got up and stood on a chair, and he says, "This bird was born to fly. He's no chicken." He let it go. Ew, it plummeted and hit the ground on the bottom and went, oof, And he shook his head. He says, "That's not right either." He picked that bird up, and before his friend could stop him, he got up on the hayloft and let this bird go, and it hit the bottom again. Finally, took it, got up to the highest part of the barn, climbed a ladder, got up as high as he could, let this thing loose, and it went, whew, and then at the end, it fluttered and started moving horizontally, and then they saw this thing take off and disappear in the horizon. God thinks of us as eagles. He doesn't want us, we eagles, thinking that we're chickens. God addresses us as if we were eagles, and he wants us to soar. He sure does. He wants us to exhibit and emulate all the positive characteristics of eagles. I don't know if we've ever taken inventory. What's so special about eagles besides the fact that they can fly fast? They can soar. Well, God wants us to soar. He wants us to emulate the other positive characteristics of eagles. Eagles are majestic. They're strong. They're powerful. They're bold. They're courageous. And they're uniquely intelligent, especially when facing harsh conditions and other trials. So, on your way to services today, you were probably sitting there thinking in the car, "Yes, I'm majestic. I'm strong, powerful, bold, courageous, uniquely intelligent." Is that really true? God says it's true. He addresses us as if we were eagles. That is a compliment that God gives to his brethren. I'd like for us to turn over to Isaiah 40, Isaiah chapter 40, and verse 23. And you're familiar with this if you've read anything in Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 23. Not 23, verse 30. Or give 20. Let's start in verse 29 of Isaiah 40. God gives power to the faint, and he gives those to them that have no might. He increases their strength. There may be many people in this room that have felt, "Oh yes, if it weren't for the fact that God would sustain me to keep me going, where would I be?" We don't have great physical health forever, but God can make up for what we lack. And sometimes that need or that discrepancy drives us closer to God so that we realize that he can make up for what we lack. Verse 29, he gives power to the faint, and to them that have no might he increases strength. Even the youth shall faint and be weary sooner or later. and the young men shall utterly fall. That can happen. But they that wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not be faint. Spiritually, that should apply to us, and it can. And God is confident that he can inspire us to emulate what it is to be an eagle. Eagles are not faint, and they have a phenomenal wingspan. Their wingspans are up to 10 feet in length. And there are certain aspects that eagles manifest that we can really benefit from. One of the things that enables eagles to soar is that they choose the right time to fly. And so they will wait until there are wind thermals, they call it, updrafts, where because of heat and convection current in the air, in the atmosphere, you can have different bands of rising air or descending air, downdrafts. Airline pilots deal with that all the time. And eagles will wait until there's an updraft, and then they will be able to fly on that and go higher and higher. Eagles have been known to soar at altitudes of 10,000 feet. That's as high as commercial jetliners in so many cases. It's an incredible, incredible skill that they have. You will very seldom see an eagle flapping its wings unless it's maybe chasing down food and it's on the surface, because they know what happens if eagles will flap their wings indefinitely, day after day, or hour after hour. I don't know if it would go on for days. They would die. Eagles are not designed to flap their wings. They're designed to soar majestically. The reason being, they weigh 15 pounds. They're not like little hummingbirds that can flutter and hold their own position, or like a bumblebee can. With that kind of weight, they have to move quickly. And to move quickly, they have to soar. And to be able to soar, they have to reach high altitude. So not every day is a fly day for an eagle. If, for example, an eagle is hungry and there's no updraft, there's no wind current to lift him up to 10 or even 20,000 feet or whatever it is, then he will forego the activity. He won't eat. He'll wait. He might not eat for a week. But then when he's able to soar in the updrafts, then with his keen eyesight, he's able to spot food. He can spot a mouse 2 miles away and go after it with vengeance. And we'll see some of that. Eagles are absolutely amazing. And God created them, I think, with certain characteristics that he likens us to. And sometimes in life, instead of soaring through life and through challenges or soaring above the stormy weather below, that's another characteristic that eagles will manifest when they are able to soar. They are able to avoid dangerous weather, although if they have to, they'll fly right through the most dangerous weather. Other birds will go around it. Others, hawks, osprey, others are intimidated, but not eagles. In fact, you would have to think that eagles are absolutely fearless. I'll talk about that later. It says over in James chapter 1, verses 1 through 2, an important statement that may be hard for us to relate to at times. Depends on our level of conversion, I suppose. James chapter 1, verse 2. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various diverse temptations, knowing this, that the trying of your faith works patience. And patience can have a perfect work. And patience is a wonderful virtue. Sometimes we can be intimidated by trials. And sometimes we don't allow God to help lift us up over them. And then we find ourselves flapping our wings, frantically and losing ground and getting frustrated and losing a level of faith and confidence in God and His ability to take care of us. It's very natural in the challenges of the times in which we live, and it's only going to get even more that way. We were even addressing some of this at the recent Bible study and prophecy, that we have to, the just shall live by faith, and the just shall trust. The just shall not fret and worry, excessively worry over all kinds of different scenarios. That would be like a heavy, oversized eagle at 15 pounds, that's what they oftentimes weigh, trying to flap one's wings to keep in the air. I think there was a case of, there's a time sometimes for us to take initiative and to act. And then there's times when we've done everything we can, we've exhausted all situations and possibilities, and we have to understand that God has to make up the difference for what we lack. Sometimes we should act and we don't. Take the classic case where there was the hurricane that created the floodwaters in this town, and this man's on the roof. You've heard the story. And somebody comes by in a tugboat, offers to help him. No, I'm waiting on God to help me. And then another person comes by in a helicopter. Hey, we'll throw you out a rope. You can come to safety with us. No, God will take care of it. And then he dies. And of course, in this fictitious example, he meets his maker and says to God, "Why didn't you take care of me?" And God says, "Well, I sent a helicopter and I sent a boat, and you turned it down." Well, there are times when we have to act and take advantage of circumstances, but there are some other times when there's nothing that we can do. We've done everything. And then we draw closer to God and look for one of those wind thermals. Look for God to sustain us and to help us to soar in spite of the circumstances that may surround us. Eagles will do that. And God wants to give us the strength of eagle's wings to help us in the times in which we find ourselves. Now, I have a few different video clips that I wanted to show in order to illustrate this. I am thankful to say that I got copyright permission from National Geographic in order to show these. Otherwise, we're not allowed to. So I would like to go to the first video. I think it's at the 41-minute mark. It's from a program entitled Queen of the Skies, which, of course, is a reference to eagles. So if I've got this right, you'll see an eagle soaring. It's entitled Queen of the Skies, that video. So we'll see how it comes out here. If it's not available, then we'll move on, come back to that later. When I talk about soaring, let's go over to Proverbs chapter 30. Proverbs chapter 30. In verse 18 and 19. It's always been the characteristic of eagles to be able to soar above difficulties below. In Proverbs chapter 30 and verse 18, I think summarizes it quite well. It says, "There be three things which are too wonderful for me, yea, four which I know not." And the very first one listed, the way of an eagle in the air. How is it that an animal can be sculpted or shaped or created to have this kind of a wingspan and to be able to float along? And do you realize how fast these eagles can fly? It's nothing for an eagle to go 50 to 70 miles an hour, and sometimes 100. But if they're in a nosedive and they're at 8,000-foot cliff in the Rocky Mountains and they want to dive down to get prey, they can get it cranked up to 200 miles an hour. Or if they hit a prey, another bird, in midair, it's boom, they've stunned that bird. They're very powerful like that. You soar by using the wind thermals. And eagles will be very patient to wait for the right time. As I mentioned before, it is sad if an eagle doesn't know that it's an eagle. And there's never been a time for us to be unsure about our spiritual identity, because I'm talking, of course, of characteristics we're, spiritually speaking, able to emulate these wonderful characteristics of eagles. And the eagles, of course, act on God's timing and within His will. They understand their situation. They need wind to be able to do what they have to do. And it's interesting that even in the book of Acts that God's Holy Spirit is analogous to wind. It's analogous to other things, but wind is certainly part of that. But when they fly in thermal wind, they do not have to flap their wings. A second area that eagles are famous for is that eagles don't allow their youth or the offspring to get in too complacent, to be too self-satisfied. And in the same way, God pushes His spiritual eaglets out of their comfort zones, out of their nest. And one of the big projects that eagles have to face is that after the eggs are hatched, then they are going to be brought. They have a 10-week period before they are able to fly. Do we have? Is the screen on now? Okay. Well, let's play that one that shows the soaring of the eagles, because it really is majestic. If that's available. If not, we can catch it later. But
I don't have the video, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Anyway, we'll move on to the next video, if we have it. It's entitled American Bald Eagle Video. Do we have that? If so, I'd try to show some pictures of the construction of the nests of an eagle. Now, it's interesting that eagles will build a nest that the next generation will use, and then the generation after that, and they'll keep adding to it. Some of the nests of an eagle weigh over 2,000 pounds. Let's see what we have now. Okay, they're starting to construct the nest. It's mainly the male that is responsible for that. The only time they really flap their wings is to get something to eat or to do this kind of construction. So I've got the first clip running at 3 minutes 40 seconds to 4 minutes 40 seconds. So once we complete that one, we'll go to another one. We'll go to the 12-minute mark and look at another minute and a half. Let's see where we are. That's big enough for a man we'll watch him crawl into this nest. The things that you see are different bones and different other prey. Yeah. That's a big investment. In 10 weeks, these little creatures are going to fly. And the only time that an eagle will eat, what can I say, pablum, is during this stretch of time here. That's an example of a soaring eagle. They don't have to flap their wings. They just use the wind that God has given them. We have to do the same thing. Okay, let's go to minute number 12. see what's next. At any rate, we don't have time to look at everything, but in this particular hour-long video, they showed this one man just sitting in the nest, and there were room for a couple other people there. It was huge. A nest will go for generations, maybe 300 years. It'll be used over and over again. Anyway, they are identifying all the different animals that were consumed here that were brought back to the lair. And they're very frugal that way. Okay, if not sure I caught that, but anyway, let me cover some more material. When we face trials, of course, we can't flap our wings like crazy. We can be soaring just like the eagles. In 1 Peter 5 and verse 7, I'll just make reference to that God cares for us. He cares for us. And then we saw these little eaglets after they were just hatched. And the parents know that there'll be a time to teach them to fly. Now, various eagles will have their nests in the forest like you see here. But there are other nests that are maybe on cliffs that are 5,000 or 7,000 feet up with big drop-offs in the Rocky Mountains. That is often the case. And with the smaller nests, the female will start to, when it's time for the youth to learn to fly, she will start to take part of the nest and dismantle it, throw the twigs over the cliff. And day by day, the young little eagles realize, hey, the guardrails are being taken away. And sometimes the entire top of the cliff will be erased, eliminated, so that the little birds might roll off. And when the time comes for them to be able to fly, if they haven't done it already, and some will on their own, the parents will be ready and kick them off the cliff. And they'll go for 5,000 feet down. And if they haven't picked up the flight, then one of the parents will fly under it, catch it, carry it up, and they'll do it all over again. And it's amazing. God has put that instinct in them. And so it is that when we walk by faith and not by sight, we may not know what's around the next corner. But if we slip, if we go off of a cliff, God can still rescue us. He's there for us. He cares about us. He promises He won't allow us to face anything that we can't handle. That's in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13. And sometimes we just don't know what's around the next corner. But we know that God loves us and that sometimes He needs to rescue us or be there for us or help us. You know, we're described as being pilgrims and strangers on this earth. Our citizenship is in heaven. There was a book that came out years ago entitled Even an Eagle Needs a Push. And you see this in the animal kingdom as part of the nurturing process. In Deuteronomy 32 is a beautiful description of what is called stirring the nest. Deuteronomy chapter 32 and verse 1. Says, O give ear, O heavens, and I will speak, O earth, the words of my mouth. Deuteronomy 32 and verse 2. My doctrine shall drop as the rain, my speech shall distill as the dew, as the small rain upon the tender herb, as the shower upon the grass. And while those are noteworthy scriptures, that's not exactly what I was after. It's in Deuteronomy 32. But it talks about the lovingness of an eagle or parent to be able to provide a nest. 11. Thank you. As an eagle stirs up her nest, flutters over her young, spreads abroad her wings, takes them and bears them on her wings. This is so true when the eaglets are being trained to fly and trained to learn how to access the wind thermals. You know, when they're born, those eaglets have no feathers. At 10 weeks, they've got over 7,000 feathers. They have the ability. God is not asking us to do any more than what he expects eaglets to do, spiritually speaking. But when God stirs the nest, he doesn't indiscriminately do it. He doesn't just leave us hanging or overwhelm us by throwing us off a cliff, not without some kind of a contingency. But God knows that if we are forever in a comfort zone, we will probably not grow spiritually to the extent that we can when we have occasional challenges or something to work against or need to have faith to endure something. You know, we grow through that. And if God did not allow some adversity in the animal kingdom, then all the different species would be so complacent and so underdeveloped that they could die out. In the long run, God knows what's best for animals. When you see animals that fight in the wild, and it's the survival of the fittest, you might think, how cruel. But the alternative would be to give them such peace and such security that they would lack any development. It's just like with a butterfly. You might think with a butterfly that's trying to open its wings for the very first time, oh, I'll help it. I don't want to see that butterfly struggle to open its wings. And if you do open it, it will not live very long. Because when it struggles and fights to open the wings up for the first time, and it's no longer a caterpillar, it does not develop the lungs. Or it will develop the lungs if it fights and struggles and fights and struggles. But if somebody opens up the wings for it, its lungs are underdeveloped, it will die. So when God allows the animal kingdom to have different skirmishes, to have a pecking order, it is what is best in the long run. When God allows certain trials, he'll help us get through them. He'll give us a thermal wind sooner or later, but it's for our own development. If God can develop eagles, he can develop human beings spiritually. Has God ever kicked us out of the nest? I think many times he probably has. You know, our comfort zones are not necessarily our friends, spiritually speaking. God gives us a mix of various trials and times of peace, but always we can put the prod on ourselves by trying to enhance our relationship with God. The third area that is worth noting is the vision of an eagle. Eagles are visionary. They have an ability to look at 270 degrees. That is quite a span. They almost have eyes in the back of their heads. As I mentioned before, they could see a mouse over 2 miles away. The famous baseball player, Ted Williams, last player to hit over 400 in a season, was described as having phenomenal eyesight, that he could stand there and look at a baseball coming at him at 90 miles an hour at the plate and could read the label of the manufacturer of the ball. That's incredible eyesight, but eagles have extra sets of eyes. They have, first of all, eyes that have 4 times the rods of a human eye, which means they have such acuity, such ability to see in finite detail. And then they have an outer eye over the inner one, basically, or a covering that enables them to go through storms and not be fazed by it. Other animals couldn't do that. human beings couldn't do that. There are plenty of people in this room that probably say, I hope I'm not sitting under a wind current because it'll dry out my contacts. Well, eagles don't have to worry about that. And they have resilient eyes. I said 2 miles away to see a mouse. They can lock on a target from 3 miles and stay focused on that. And it's amazing. They're some of the greatest fishermen. They can fly at 75 miles an hour over the water and find a fish that they saw a couple miles ago from a distance and reach down with their talons and pick it out of the water. So they have phenomenal vision, absolutely phenomenal vision. Another area that is noteworthy, eagles live on the high ground, and they typically live alone. We have to have the high standards of Christianity, the standards that God gives us. And when eagles live on high ground and alone, they're not caught up in all the other activity of wildlife. And spiritually, there are times when we may not feel lonely, especially if we have a connection with God, but we might be alone. In Romans chapter 12 and verse 1 and 2, it says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present yourselves a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is our reasonable service, and be not conformed to this world, but be you transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you might prove what is good, acceptable, and perfect will of God. Not being conformed by the world, not being overcome and overwhelmed by society, but being able to persevere, to hold to the standards that God wants. None of us are perfect, but that is certainly the goal. It's certainly what God would want. And sometimes that means that we're not to be caught up in the day-to-day preoccupations that other people have, because those preoccupations may be insignificant or may separate us from God. It's not that we can't have friends in society, but we have to make sure that we are not compromised in our own conviction of wanting to follow where God leads. So it is that eagles set a standard like that. And I know that a number of people in the church in years and centuries gone by have been persecuted. And I've mentioned, I think, on different occasions that we have brethren that are baptized members in prison. Then they stand out. They're not conformists. People think it's strange. They're not part of the Kings gang or the Crips or the L.A. Kings. They're not part of the Black Panthers or the White Panthers or the Yellow. There are unbelievable hundreds and hundreds of groups that you can join. And everybody knows they're different, and they get harassed on occasion. But they are respected because most people want to be part of something. I'll join this gang. I'll join this religion. I'll join whatever it is because I don't want to be in this place all by myself. And that's typical of human nature. They want to belong to something. And even if the standards are not right, some groups have very high standards, I should say. I don't want to be indiscriminate on this, but there are too many false values running around, and people, if they're not careful, can be affected by that, and there's no need for that. Something that's unique to eagles is that they want also not milk, they want fresh meat. Fresh meat. The meat that they desire is of an animal that's dead. And I didn't realize this, but there are some predatory animals that will eat their prey alive, which sounds cruel. But it is astonishing what the eagles will do to get fresh meat. And you think, well, why must they do that? Why must they be a predatory bird? Why must they kill? Now, when you use analogies, that doesn't make a total connection, perfect connection. If I said Mary is as busy as a bee, we know Mary can be busy just like a bee is, but it doesn't mean that Mary makes honey. So analogies can break down in a sense. Jesus Christ is described as our elder brother. Well, we're married to Christ. So in a sense, he's our husband. Well, how can he be husband and elder brother? Well, those are expressions of understanding when you use analogy. So when I talk about eagles will kill to get fresh meat, I'm not suggesting that any of us do the same thing. But it's important spiritually for us to desire meat and not just the milk of the word. In 1 Corinthians chapter 3, 1 Corinthians chapter 3, and then if it's possible to go to the next video clip where it's entitled Eagle versus Goat, we'll try that one. But in 1 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 2, chapter 3, verse 2, Paul said, talking about his frustration with the carnality of many people in Corinth, verse 2, I have fed you with milk and not with meat, because they couldn't handle anything beyond simple instruction. I've fed you with milk and not with meat, for hitherto you were not able to bear it, and you're still not able to. He's telling that particular audience. And Hebrews chapter 5, this was not unique just to Corinth, but historically, some brethren have been complacent to just learn a little bit about doctrine, make a little bit of an effort to try to follow God, and they shortchange themselves. Hebrews 5 and verse 12, for when for the time you ought to be teachers, you have need that one teach you again, which be of the first principles of the oracles of God, and are become such as have need of milk and not of strong meat. Milk is important. You start out on that. For example, you prove that the Bible is God's holy inspired word, but you want to advance to say, okay, what does the Bible actually say? And you get into different, deeper levels of understanding. And maybe study material that is not just pablum, but has some meat to it, some strength to it. For everyone that uses milk is unskillful in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. Verse 14, but strong meat belongs to them that are full of age, even those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil. So we want to advance from milk to meat. Those eaglets were settling for milk early on in their infancy, but very, very quickly thereafter, they were given fish chunks to eat, and then other meat of other animals. And for an eagle to go vegetarian is a death sentence. It's okay if humans want to be vegetarian, but eagles will die unless they have fresh meat on a consistent basis. Now, is that video ready? Okay. Now, this will take your breath away, because if you think that the goat got a bad deal on this, well, you realize God created what you're about to see. But you talk about determination, be fixated on a target with outstanding eyesight, and the ability to fly 100 miles an hour to get to it before the opportunity is missed. Take a look at this. He's going to actually take off with this thing. But something happens. Oh. Not everybody gets to escape. He doesn't flap his wings. He's just using the wind currents at high speed. that's what it looks like when you're up there. They've been able to attach cameras to the wings of certain eagles. I can't remember what's next on this. That's the same cliff that the little eagles have to jump off of. The ultimate Happy Meal. Okay. Since we're looking at this, notice how distinct the colors are. You've got white and brown. Many animals depend on camouflage to be able to survive in their habitat. But these birds can be identified far, far away. These birds can be identified from the distance because they have contrasting color. And that's the way it is with true Christians. Our examples stand out. As I already had mentioned, you don't have to be a church member behind bars in a prison somewhere to stand out. A lot of people at your place of business, your work, your clients will know that you're different. They may not know why, but by one's positive example, one's honesty, one's ability, we set an example. Well, eagles can't hide who they are. And why would they? I've talked about the fact that they are fearless, they're decisive, they'll attack poisonous snakes. There's another video clip I couldn't get the permission to use, but it showed an eagle carrying off a goat off of the mountain for at least a mile, descending at a 45-degree angle and then landing on another cliff where it couldn't get away, and then that was the end of that. That goat. And again, somebody could say, it's just not right. You showing these video clips of the goats, you should show goats getting away, escaping, but it's what God had created. And God understood and he inspired Paul to talk to Timothy and other people in the Bible to be stirred up about their way of life and about the fact that God was there for them and would help them. Eagles are fearless and they're decisive. We have to work toward this. It's something that we learn. The former president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela, made the statement, acting decisively is not the absence of fear, but the determination to face and overcome. So it is that eagles definitely are that way. They are bold. There are people that have gotten film footage of eagles lifting a crocodile out of a river. They'll face and not be intimidated by other animals 3 and 4 times their size. They've chased dogs, wolves. They're just not, they won't back down. One other thing that is amazing is that eagles are loyal to the marriage covenant. Now, we're married to Christ or betrothed to Christ, and that's stated over in Revelation 19 and verse 7, where it says the wife shall make herself ready. Symbolically, we are going to meet Christ and be married to him, and we'll have the marriage supper that will inaugurate that wonderful development. But eagles are amazing in the fact that they go through an unusual ritual when they decide to mate, or I was going to say be married. But it is a volition where they both have to agree to it. And we talked about those gigantic nests that the eagles can build. Well, if an eagle is starting out, it's the male that builds the nest and trusts the nest to attract the female. And just like a bowerbird will put different shiny objects and things in the nest to attract her. And she'll come along and indicate an interest. And then they'll fly together and zigzag around together, checking each other out to make sure each one has equal stamina. And then, in many cases, they'll go to a place like in the Rocky Mountains, and they will latch on to each other with their powerful talons, their claws, where it's impossible for either one to fly away. And so then they go into a death spiral at 10,000 feet, and they're connected to each other. Neither one wants to let go. And they're on to 5,000, 4,000 feet, 2,000 feet, and you just see this swirling cluster of feathers and wings flapping like crazy. And at the last second, then they split before they crash into the ground. And they're married at that point. We ought to do that in the church. No, we should. But you talk about something that's for life. We live in a throwaway generation where a lot of times commitments are dumped. Now, I understand there's extenuating circumstances. I think we all do, issues of abuse and other things that make it prohibitive for where not everybody that was ever married needs or must remain married. There are certain extenuating circumstances that our people typically counsel about before they make any rash decisions. But that's a major step, marriage is. And it's a commitment that is till death do us part. And God works that through eagles. And I was going to say they set a tremendous example. Well, it's all driven by instinct. But that is the way it is. And we're married to Christ, and that relationship goes on forever. Forever. And it's significant that we consider that. Now, I talk about the claws that they have, the talons. These claws are so powerful. Even their beaks are powerful. Their beaks, when they chomp down on something, it's 750 pounds per square inch. That kind of bite, it's decisive. And when they bite their prey, you see that happening. But their talons are phenomenal. And it's another example of what a Christian should do, is when an eagle gets a hold of something that's significant, like his next meal, he's not going to let go. And he can carry, as we saw, a mountain goat in the air and can carry it a long distance if he has to. He's that strong and using the wind currents. But it makes me think of 1 Thessalonians, and let's turn over there. 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 21. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. In verse 21. Prove all things, hold fast to that which is good. Hold fast to that which is good. It doesn't say here, be complacent with what is good. Just have a small little grab, a small little hold on it. No, hold fast. And the word hold fast, or there's one word that's represented or translated from the Greek word. It's the Greek word takeo. Takeo means to latch on. Takeo means a lot more than just hold on. It means grab, just hold it as hard as possible and never, never, never let it go. There was a time when the two people ran a mail route from Boston, Massachusetts to Lewiston, Maine. They ran it every night. It was a mail delivery run. And on this prop plane, apparently the back door was not properly shut. And when the two men were in flight, they heard this rattling going by. So the co-pilot said, I'll go back there and I'll try to slam the thing shut. Well, instead of slamming it shut, he got sucked halfway out of the aircraft. And here they were at 10,000 feet. And it was in January, and it was frigid cold out. And before he would have completely been sucked out of the plane, he latched onto this one bar that was at the end of the plane. And so now most of his body was outside the plane, and his hands were inside, wrapped around this bar, and he just clutched on it because he was afraid. If he let go, he'd be in midair and he would crash. He said, it was so ironic, I was right over my own neighborhood, near Lewiston, and I knew my wife was in the house at that particular moment thinking everything's fine. She can go to probably be heading for bed now. And my family's down there, and here I am like a flag flapping in the wind, and it's so cold, and he thought he was going to die. His friend continued to fly the plane and radioed for help, says, I think my partner might still be on the plane, but if so, he's half out of it, and he'll definitely need medical help when we land. And sure enough, when they came to land, the people could see that poor soul hanging out the back of the prop plane. And so the paramedics ran there when the plane stopped, and then they tried to pull him free of the plane. Well, he couldn't let go. His hands were frozen over that bar. And as hard as he could, he lost any ability to do that. The medics had to get firemen to come with crowbars and pry those fingers one at a time off of the bar. He was in spasm. That's takeo. That's the kind of a grab that an eagle has on prey. Once they latch on, it's over for the prey. And that's the same kind of tenacity that we are to hang on to true doctrine, true faith, and to not equivocate. And it should mean that much to us. And probably it does, or we wouldn't be here. But it's nothing to take for granted. With the advent of false doctrine that proliferates in this age, the end time, and all, it's so important for us to know what is true and what is provable and what can be reproven. And so it is that we need to exercise takeo, just like an eagle. So we've looked at a number of different features that eagles manifest. And do we have any other video that we can show? I know that one that's I think would be good is the video of American bald eagle at minute 44 to the end, which is maybe another minute. You can see what amazing fishermen these eagles are. And at one point, they're playing a game of rugby, it looks like, with some of the catch. That looks like a mating ritual. That's right. That's like a little pass. Nothing goes to waste. soar with God, the way those eagles soar with the wind. So let me draw this to a conclusion here. Going back to Isaiah chapter 40, when we see examples like what we read here, I think it means a lot more to us now. Isaiah 40, verse 29, God gives power to the faint, and to them that have no might he increases strength. Even the youth shall faint, be weary, yes. Verse 31, but they that wait on the Lord shall renew their strength, and they shall mount up with wings as eagles, shall run and not be weary, shall walk and not be faint. Spiritually, I think that's highly desirable. And to make that happen, eagles have been endowed with the ability to access thermal winds. We can access the same thing spiritually speaking. We realize that just like with eaglets that grow, eagles that grow, young eagles, we have to sometimes get out of our comfort zone. Otherwise, we won't grow. If we don't grow, we could wither on the vine. God will push us out of our comfort zones, just like eagles do. But he does that with great affection. He will stir the nest, just as parent eagles do with their offspring. Also, having the vision of an eagle, I don't think we turn to Proverbs 29, verse 18, but it says that without vision, the people perish. But with vision, of course, good things can happen. And for an eagle, vision is absolutely essential to be able to identify future needs and pray. With us, vision can incorporate not just planning for the future, but understanding the scope and breadth of the commission of God and the fact that we are part of an end-time work. And if we have a vision of where that's going and how that pays off and how that changes other people's lives, then we can be more enthusiastic about endorsing it. So having that kind of spiritual vision to match the acuity of an eagle is absolutely wonderful. Eagles live on high ground. We have to live on high ground as well. We're not to conform to the wrong elements of society. And just like eagles, we need fresh meat. We can't just live on pablum, but that's essential to start out on. And we have to have takeo. We have to be able to latch on, hold on to that which is right, which is good, which is valuable. And just like eagles, be fearless and be decisive where we need to be. Some people get intimidated and overwhelmed by situations and think, I don't know where to turn. It doesn't have to be true for us. I mentioned that eagles have contrasting color. Eagles are identified. All the other animals know where the eagles are. They know. Even at 2 miles away, there'll be rabbits that'll perk up and they'll know they're in trouble. And at 2 miles, they've got as fast as that eagle can fly is the amount of time they have to get to a place of safety. And then eagles are loyal to each other, and we need to be that loyal to God. It's a very, very interesting array of attributes that they have. And you can understand what I mean now. If there's one thing that is bad in life, it would be an eagle that would not know that it was an eagle. That would not know that it could take advantage of these different talents and inclinations and abilities that God has given to eagles. So it's not accidental that they are chosen in Isaiah 40 and elsewhere, as we've seen, to be examples for us. We can be thankful that God has given us not just a future, but the characteristics in which to implement to be successful, being the people that he wants us to be.